it started here or it came from there, at some point, both of those came from someplace else. The tribe is recent. The nation is recent. Our ethnicity is recent. Our race is recent. At one time, there was nothing but black people on the planet. Not black skin, black people ethnically, nationally, tribally, racially. There's always been tribes on the planet. But we were only one black nation. Trying to enslave indigenous people, trying to slowly make an infringement in, set up a trading post, and then call on their government, oh, they're taking my land. What, you mean the land that you came and squatted on? That somebody else owns, and then to add insult to the injury, they're looking at their property, chasing them out of land that they're trying to claim as their own. That's what infuriated them. That's what made them want to take this from Mexico. They wanted this for themselves, and in particular, they knew the land was rich, but you were the richness that they wanted. They wanted the black slave back. So they went and fought, and there was war fought over the black man of America. And Mexico lost, unfortunately. And we go down the annals of history now. And black people disappear from the history of Mexico. Even from the Mexicans' memory. They're not taught how they lost Texas. They're not taught how they were conquered and enslaved. They make us think it was Pocahontas' story, where it was some benevolent white man came and they saw each other across a bloody field of war that they started. And then they fell in love, and look, love conquers everything, even the hatred between two warring people. No. Lies can only for so long hide the truth. They hated what Mexico did by giving you land so much that when they took Texas, when after the Alamo, after all of that stuff, they marched the American army all the way down into Mexico City. And they were going to take Mexico City. But they decided, we'll just take Texas, we'll take all of that because it's minerally rich. But just as a show, they marched into Mexico City and allowed them to. And what we've been dealing with ever since is a docile government in Mexico that serves the needs of the rich and wealthy and the white. There's a white aristocracy in Mexico that does not serve the masses of dark-skinned people. That's what they're terrified about. That no matter our skin shade because of the mixture, that we would hear this truth and realize I'm not black in the African sense, I'm black in the Asiatic God sense. We're members of the same family. I want to read you this as I close. I tweeted the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan last year a question, and it's taken me a year to really understand parts of his answer. I asked him, I said, Brother Minister, what do you think is the key to the unity of the black, indigenous, Mexican, Latin American, and Aboriginal people? He responded to me while I was in the hospital with my daughter. My 8-month-old daughter had just been born. So as I was in the hospital, I got a chance to read the answer from the minister. But because of all of that, I hadn't really studied the answer until I was coming here. He said, to the degree that we are once that root is known, that we are all from the same great source, then it is easy to see how we can relate to each other past our tribes, nations, ethnicities, and races. Period. I thought it was some complicated scheme, or... You know why the Son of Man is told in Ezekiel to take both sticks and make them one in his hand? It becomes a rod in his hand, which is a sign of his authority and his anointing from God. The two people, the black, the brown, the red, the yellow masses are two branches of the same tree. That's why there's so much commonality. We have a feathered serpent here, you have one in Africa. We have pyramids here, you have them in Africa. You find them in the coast of Japan. You find these motifs everywhere. We painted ourselves, we covered ourselves in the fur and skins of animals. You did it in Africa. Now, we can argue about, well, it started here or it came from there. At some point, both of those came from someplace else. The tribe is recent. The nation is recent. Our ethnicity is recent. Our race is recent. At one time, there was nothing but black people on the planet. Not black skin, black people ethnically, nationally, tribally, racially. There's always been tribes on the planet. But we were only one black nation. We had yellow, brown, red hues to our skin, even white-colored skin, but we did not mistreat one another based on that because we recognized it came from the same roots. We knew that it was a common origin. What has happened with all the gods we know now? It's that we've been taught to hate ourselves. And what we are getting from the man who is the key is how to reconnect to one another.
So I've been wondering, even though Mexico was the first place to have a freed slave state, including Africans, of course, and the indigenous, or also known as los indígenas personas, I wonder if the African slaves back in the days in the United States had known about this, what would Mexico be today if the slaves from the United States migrated into Mexico? Now, for all of you that do not know, in 1609, there was this Nigerian African slave that was brought to Mexico with Hernan Cortez and Los Españoles, or the Spaniards, to Mexico to work. His name was Gaspar Yanga Veracruz. And he was pretty much an African prince. And I guess what had happened is that the Spaniards said, you know what, let's go to Africa, let's go kidnap some Africans, and them not knowing Gaspar Yanga was a prince from, I believe, West Nigeria. So, once he was brought over to Spain and then migrated to Mexico, he worked for the Spaniards, you know, for like 30 years. He talked to the indigenous people because, yes, the indigenous was slaves too. So he was like, you know what, let's team up. I'm tired of working for the damn Spaniards. And since you Native American Indians, what we know of the indigenous people in the United States, he said, you know what, let's go ahead and rebel against these damn Spaniards. So you guys know the land, and we have a lot more people than these damn Spaniards. So what had happened is that Gaspar Yanga and his team, Africans and the indigenous slaves, they found land in the high mountains, blah, blah, blah. You know, he told the Spaniards, look, we go give you a good ass kicking if you come to our land, and let's make a peace treaty. Spaniards like, damn, okay, you know what? You're right, we can't overpower you guys. So you can have this little piece of land, also known as Yanga Veracruz. So that was just a quick little one-on-one history with the African slave rebellion here in Mexico. But again, so if the United States African slaves known about Mexico having a freed slave state, which means that nobody can own slaves in Veracruz, Mexico, man, I wonder how different Mexico would be. I don't know. That's why I'm asking you guys. But would Mexico look a lot more like Brazil? Or would Mexico look more like the Dominican Republic or Cuba? Who knows? But all I'm saying is that I think it would have been a smart move if they did know that Mexico did have a free slave state. And again, what's most important is that here in Mexico, it was the first community throughout the Americas, that's North, Central, and South, that they had a freed slave state in 1609. And yes, the African slaves mixed in with those beautiful indigenous people. It made all kind of zombos, I believe that's the term in the caste system that they used. But again, would Mexico look a lot more like Brazil if the U.S. African slaves migrated into Mexico? And how different do you think Mexico would be if that was the case?
I say I'm Mexican, 100% Mexican, and I am quite familiar that I have some African in me, but I'm not sure why or how it happened. I just have an idea.
I'd rather consider myself Afro-Mexican just because Chicano people are going to be like, oh, you're from Mexico, like, what?
Afro-mexicano.
Descendiente, yo diría.
Afro-mexicano.
Afro-Mexicano?
I feel like I don't belong anywhere. I feel like I can't, like, I don't have a place, you know? And I feel like that's just the only thing that's keeping me back.
I think one of the saddest things that can happen to somebody is to not know what they are or where they're from. A lot of these folks, especially when they grow up in communities where being different is not okay, or the dominant culture is not theirs, they don't have their self-esteem is low, you know. So knowing who they are, I think helps them with their confidence and their self-esteem.
The American West conjures images of adventure, lawlessness, and opportunity. But what possessed us to go west in the first place? It all traces back to an important but not very well-known conflict in the mid-19th century called the Mexican-American War. In the 1840s, America was a pretty young country, and it was hungry to expand. President James K. Polk was especially eager to acquire more territory. He believed in manifest destiny. That's the idea the United States had a duty to expand westward across the North American continent. There was a lot of incentive for American settlers to go west. They could spread religion, strike it rich in business, or just get a fresh start. Needless to say, America's neighbor, Mexico, wasn't thrilled about the westward expansion craze. Both countries were already on thin ice. Mexico was bitter about losing Texas to the U.S. after it won its independence in 1836. President Polk wanted California and New Mexico too, and he offered Mexico $30 million to purchase them. But they refused to sell. But hang on, conquering the West was America's manifest destiny, right? So Polk wouldn't take no for an answer. He picked a fight, sending troops to occupy a disputed area of the Texas and Mexico border. And when American troops and the Mexican cavalry clashed, Polk seized the opportunity to declare war on Mexico on May 13, 1846. Ultimately, Mexico was unprepared for war. Its internal politics were just a mess, and its cavalry couldn't measure up against the expertise of the U.S. military. After 2 years of fighting, Mexico was defeated, and in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, it ceded a third of its territory to the U.S., areas that include modern-day Utah, California, Nevada, Arizona, and Texas. The Mexican-American War had a major impact because it resulted in one of the largest territorial expansions of the United States. It also launched the careers of a few generals you may have heard of: future U.S. President Zachary Taylor and Civil War titans Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant.
In 1830, Mexico banned immigration from the United States. Why? Well, one reason, slavery. But for the whole picture, we have to look to the history of Texas. Before Texas was a U.S. state and its own nation, it was part of Mexico's northern state of Coahuila y Tejas. But the region was sparsely populated and vulnerable to Native American tribes seeking to reclaim the land. So in the early 1820s, Mexico opened its northern territory to some American immigrants with the idea that the Americans would protect the region from falling under Native American control. To entice American settlers, the government offered cheap land grants. In 1823, Stephen F. Austin became the first to receive a grant and the right to settle 300 families. Others soon followed. In exchange, the settlers agreed to speak Spanish, convert to Catholicism, become Mexican citizens, and abstain from keeping slaves. But the Americans weren't so good at holding up their end of the bargain. With little oversight from the Mexican government, most remained Protestant, spoke English, and didn't give a hoot about Mexican law. With the cotton industry booming, cheap farmland in Tejas attracted droves of cotton farmers, and cotton farms meant slaves. By 1829, Mexico realized it had a real problem. The American population in Tejas had swelled to nearly 20,000, making it practically impossible for the government to enforce the law. Mexico rightly feared it would lose Tejas to the Americans. So, on April 6, 1830, in a bid to maintain control and keep slavery out of its country, Mexico passed a law intended to curb the flood of immigration from the United States to Tejas. It didn't work. The Americans kept coming, and the law further strained Mexico's delicate relationship with the settlers. Then, to make matters worse, in 1835, Mexican President Antonio López de Santa Anna repealed the 1824 Mexican Constitution. He moved to centralize Mexican politics, stripping Tejas and the other Mexican states of their right to self-govern. And all hell broke loose. The settlers saw this attack on their rights as the final straw, their only option, rebellion. But Santa Anna was prepared to put any dissent down, and violently. In early 1836, he marched his troops north. Remember the Alamo? On February 23, 1836, Santa Anna launched a 13-day siege on the settlers' Catholic mission turned fortress. When he finally penetrated the walls, he slaughtered nearly every person inside, ending the battle, but not the war. The settlers called in reinforcements from the states, promising land and free passage. 1 month later, General Sam Houston launched a surprise attack at San Jacinto, capturing Santa Anna and forcing him to sign away Mexican ownership of Texas. The newly independent Texans were psyched. As an independent entity, they would be free to join the United States, where slavery was legal. But oh, the irony. Slavery, which had greatly influenced their bid for independence, now practically extinguished any chances they had for statehood. Because back in the US, Congress was grappling with the spread of slavery as their nation expanded westward. Annexation of Texas would bring in another slave state. As Congress debated how to maintain the balance, Texas remained in a state of limbo. For nearly 10 years, Texas struggled as an independent nation, suffering from economic instability and border disputes with Mexico. Finally, in 1845, Texas was admitted to the Union, but it was short-lived. 15 years later, Texas would secede from the U.S. as the country headed towards a civil war over the issue of slavery.